All paints are Daniel Smith watercolor. I used lamp black, quinacridone gold, quinacridone coral, quinacridone purple, cobalt teal blue, zoyshite green, phthalo green, indanthrone blue, quinacridone burnt scarlet, new gamboge, and sepia. After drawing a light sketch on the watercolor paper, I start to put in my value study using lamp black. I first wet the area I'm going to be working on, and then I drop in the paint and make it darker in some areas and lighter in others. The reason I use lamp black is because it is staining, non-granulating, and very neutral. It's also opaque if you put it on thick, but I'm putting it on quite thin. I don't do this for every painting, but if there's a lot of darks in the painting, I find it very helpful. I can get a sense of my composition right out of the gate. So once that is dry, I use Richardson Liquid Mask to protect the horse once it is defined. It's kind of a pink color and fairly thick, but you can put it into another small container with a lid and add a small amount of water, then use a dip pen or a ruling pen to do the fine hairs on the horse's tail and mane. So once the masking is dry, I wet the background in the area I plan to work on and add the black in areas. Then I squirt it with water so it will spread. I have the board at an angle so it spreads really well. I let that dry and flip the board over so I can work on the upper area. I had put mask and dots in the area that I wanted to keep light for the backlighting on the tree. Then I worked on the trunk of the tree to define that space. The thing you have to realize with watercolor is it always dries much lighter than what you see here. Golden has a coir watercolor that they say doesn't do that. I have some, but I haven't really tried it for that. So I just finish up my tree, and then next day I flip it over and I work on the field area. So I used quinacridone gold and burnt scarlet and the coral for the dusty area behind the horse. And I also put zoyshite green, which gives a really nice texture for the background shady part of the grass. So then I flip it over while that was drying, and I took out the masking off the dots in the background and began adding the phthalo green and new gamboge and quinacridone gold. I let them mix on the paper. I added some of the quinacridone burnt scarlet there in the trunk area of the tree to kind of brown it up a bit. And so I just kind of work the colors around and make them look like a tree. So then the next day I turned it right side up again and used a ruling pen to put masking in the area I want little fine grasses in the foreground. Once those are dry, I wet the area and drop in quinacridone purple, quinacridone gold, quinacridone coral, zoyshite green, indanthrone blue, and allow them to blend on the paper. So you can see there how I just kind of drop them in and they blend. So once that is finished, I will flip it over and let that one dry while I continue to define the tree. I use indanthrone blue to push back there, to make that recede back into the background. So so notice that great big brush I have there. Yeah, well, I use whatever I happen to pick up, and that worked really well for branches, so that's what I used. So now I'm adding more zoyshite green in the background area of the grass. I'm also adding some cobalt teal to depict the reflected light coming off the sky. I'm adding a little more burnt scarlet and quinacridone gold in the foreground, as well as some purple, keeping the area where the dust is untouched so it will be lighter than the rest. So I remove the masking and start to work on putting reflected light on the bottom of the horse. When the sun shines on the ground and reflects up onto the animal, it shows some of the color from the ground, and I think it adds more life to a painting. So I always try to put that in. So the paint here looks really bright, and that's because instead of Daniel Smith Lamp Black, I think I had used Graham, which doesn't seem to be as staining as the Daniel Smith brand. So I had lost a lot of color when I pulled the masking. I should have added more black in the red areas, but I didn't, so I'll need to correct it later with sepia. So I add Ended Throne Blue for the shadow on the white part of the horse. Then went into the pinto spots with quinacridone burnt scarlet for that area. On the shadow areas of the horse's leg, I add some zoyshite green for texture and to kind of make it blend in a little better with the background. On the horse's face, I used more Ended Throne Blue and quinacridone purple to further define the structure of the face. On the detail areas like the mane and tail, I do use a smaller brushes like a number 4 cat's tongue and a number 1 liner brush. I also use a dip pen for really fine areas. So because watercolor fades when it dries, I just keep adding paint once it is dry in areas until I get the value that I'm looking for. So there you can kind of see the dip pen doing its work. So unfortunately, on the very last day that I did this took several weeks. I've totaled up maybe 50 hours altogether, all scrunched up here, but I forgot to record the last day, and so it doesn't matter. There wasn't that much more that was done, but here it is. Here it is. This is pretty close to the finished piece, so hopefully you kind of understand how I use Lamp Black. And there she is, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy trying out using Lamp Black.